Picture this. You're sitting on a commercial flight in the 1960s, the engines roaring as the plane climbs into the sky, and in the cockpit sits a confident young pilot in a crisp uniform, sunglasses reflecting the clouds, passengers trusting him with their lives at 30,000 feet. Except there's one terrifying problem. He has no pilot's license, no formal training, and no legal right to be there at all. And for years, nobody realizes it. This is the unbelievable true story of Frank Abagnale, the teenager who convinced the world he was an airline captain, flew across continents pretending to command aircraft for Pan Am, cashed millions in fraudulent checks, impersonated lawyers and doctors, and triggered an international manhunt led by the FBI, becoming one of the most audacious con artists in American history. Frank Abagnale, Jr. was born in 1948 in New York and grew up in a comfortable middle-class family. But his life took a sharp turn when his parents divorced during his teenage years, an event that deeply affected him and planted the seeds of rebellion and reinvention. At just 16 years old, feeling lost and desperate to prove himself, Frank began experimenting with deception, first altering small checks to gain extra cash, then gradually realizing how easy it was to manipulate systems that were built on trust. In the 1960s, banking systems were far less sophisticated than they are today, and check verification relied heavily on manual processes, which created an opening for someone bold enough to exploit it. Frank wasn't just bold, he was fearless. After successfully passing fraudulent checks in multiple states, he understood something critical. Authority is often about appearance. People rarely question someone who looks like they belong. That insight would become his greatest weapon. One day, while observing airline crews walk confidently through airports, he had an idea that would change everything. If he could impersonate a pilot, he could travel for free using a little-known industry practice called deadheading, where airline employees could ride in the cockpit jump seat when repositioning between flights. Frank called Pan Am, claiming he was a pilot who had lost his uniform and credentials. With charm and confidence, he convinced the company to issue replacement documents. He then purchased a pilot uniform from a tailor, and suddenly, a teenager with no aviation training was walking through airports as Captain Frank Williams, the alias he adopted. It's important to understand, he did not actually fly commercial jets as the operating pilot in command, but he occupied cockpits, rode jump seats, and presented himself as a legitimate crew member, while licensed pilots handled the controls. Even so, the deception was staggering. Over the next few years, he traveled to dozens of countries, logging hundreds of thousands of miles, all while passing forged payroll checks and exploiting airline banking systems. He studied pilot lingo, learned aircraft terminology, and mastered the posture and demeanor of authority. Confidence was his camouflage. As his check fraud schemes expanded, he exploited the fact that airline payroll checks were trusted by banks. He would deposit fake checks and withdraw funds before the fraud was detected. At the height of his crimes, he had cashed millions of dollars in forged checks across 26 countries. Eventually, the FBI began noticing patterns. Banks reported identical fraud techniques appearing in different states. A name started surfacing repeatedly: Frank Williams. That's when Special Agent Joseph Shea of the FBI took personal interest in the case, launching an intense manhunt that would stretch internationally. But Frank didn't stop with being a fake pilot. When the pressure increased, he reinvented himself again. In Georgia, he posed as a pediatrician for nearly a year, even supervising medical residents despite having no medical training. Later, he impersonated a lawyer in Louisiana, passing the bar exam by studying obsessively for weeks. Each new identity showed not just audacity, but preparation. He wasn't reckless. He was methodical. Meanwhile, the FBI closed in. In France, authorities finally arrested him in 1969 after a former girlfriend recognized him and tipped off police. He served time in French prison under harsh conditions, then was transferred to Sweden, and eventually returned to the United States to face federal charges. At just 21 years old, Frank Abagnale had lived more lives than most people do in a lifetime. He was sentenced to prison in the U.S., but here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The FBI realized something unusual. Frank understood fraud better than almost anyone. After serving part of his sentence, he was offered a deal, help the government catch other fraudsters in exchange for reduced time. He agreed. In an almost unbelievable twist, the young con artist who once outsmarted the system began working alongside the FBI, teaching banks and corporations how to detect scams. Over time, he built a legitimate career as a security consultant and fraud prevention expert. His life story later inspired the 2002 film Catch Me If You Can, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, bringing his incredible tale to a global audience. But beyond the Hollywood version lies a deeper lesson about human psychology. Frank succeeded, not because systems were entirely broken, but because people trusted symbols of authority without question. A uniform, a confident voice, a professional title. His story exposed vulnerabilities in aviation, banking, and institutional verification processes during the 1960s, ultimately leading to tighter regulations and improved security measures. The pilot who never had a license didn't just steal money, he revealed how fragile trust can be. His journey forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How often do we assume legitimacy based on appearance? How many systems still rely on perception rather than proof? And how far could someone go today using the same tactics in a digital world? Frank Abagnale's story is one of deception, yes, but also reinvention. He began as a runaway teenager chasing identity and validation, became one of America's most notorious imposters, and ultimately transformed into a consultant helping prevent the very crimes he once committed. Whether you see him as a criminal genius, a product of his time, or a cautionary tale, one thing is undeniable. His story sounds too unbelievable to be real, yet it happened. If you want more deep dives into real stories of deception, power, and the shocking truth behind headlines, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves incredible true stories, because the next case might make this one look simple.